We could talk about the budget itself. I guess the number that seems to be getting the headlines is the $12 million bump up
Yeah.
in the budget. And I looked at past ones, thanks to like now looking at the proper numbers. It's like up by, 5 million in 1 year, 6, now here's 12. So how do we get to that?
Yeah, Phil, I think that's a good clarification is when I presented both to our board and then subsequently to GIC, that number is at 6.7% increase. The reality is what had happened is the GIC had deferred agreement to actually take off my capital. So I'm actually at 5.48%. That capital was 1.23% of my budget, a lot of dollars in order to that. So I think the first point of clarification is we're at 5.48%. Going into budgeting, you have to understand what we have to do is we have to forecast what those pressures are. We do COP-to-POP numbers, which say, how does Hamilton look like within our comparators? We have consistently below the median of where we should be. But more importantly, this year what we saw was a change to where we are on the crime severity index. And that showed that we are actually at 5th place right now. And by those numbers, we're 84 below where the median should be. So what we've done is we've been prudent. Going into 2022, we started projecting not only what was our capital 10-year plan, our operational plan, but we added a human capital plan in order to actually try to finally get to where COP-to-POP ratio would be respectable for the city of Hamilton, but also a respectable, prudent approach. So what we did is we had over 9 years agreed to add 13 officers per, get us up to 117. So 9 years down the road to get finally to where we need to be at that median. And that was accepted by our board, accepted by GIC in 2022. So going into actually this calendar year, really what we were able to say with those numbers, that I had a 4.28% budget pressure, that was just collective agreement. That's already negotiable salaries. We already have rules of where we are placed within the province, where police compensation on a collective agreement. So those were already determined. So this budget going into 2023 represents only a 0.9% increase. The other thing that I think I would like the opportunity just to really be clear on, we hear that the cost of policing keeps rising. The cost of policing keeps rising. The reality is if we look at it by portion of the city levy, and I would say that we could argue that as the city's growth and population growth, as you know, we are projecting growth, remarkable growth. Hamilton has become the place to be. And when people come to a city, they want community safety, public safety. They want to be able to do exactly what our city asks them to do, is to age gracefully and to raise a child. So what we've been able to do is project those numbers. And as such, we've landed on the 5.48% increase, because that is how we have to mitigate what has been our growing calls for service, our growing complexities of crime, very different than what it was perhaps when I joined in the early 80s, and also have to be able to deal with that violence that we're seeing. The city is unfortunately not immune to what is going on in this whole GTHA. What we have seen certainly is that spike of gun violence. We had 291 firearms that were taken off our streets in 2022. The one thing we also had saw, and CH had been really, really helpful in working with us on educating the community. Last year, as our homicides were at a record high, we had attributed to many of those to be related to gangs, to gang activities. So going out of 2021 into 2022, we did a Project Strong, stopping targeted retaliations on neighborhood gangs. And what we have saw is in fact, is that we had a better resolution to our investigations and an outcome, but we also saw that we were able to take that high number of homicides and bring them in historical low. We had only 5 homicides last year, but that violence of whether it's at the a person brandishing a knife, you're seeing the carjackings, you're seeing the amount of auto thefts that we're dealing with. The drug proliferations, the drug seizures are just unheard of what we're seeing within our partnerships. And we recognize that human trafficking, violence, drugs, shootings are certainly a part of what is Hamilton's community, because we're part of that transit of moving through southern Ontario. So we believe that we've approached this in a proper fashion.
Right. So just so I get it straight, so the increase, the total increase, like capital and everything, that's what, 6 point something %?
So the total increase as we had gone into December into January, but subsequently they've agreed to offset my capital pressures. So that 6.7 number is in fact 5.48.
Right, and out of that 5.48, there's the contracts that are already set, like the union contracts and all that. So that's already set.
Which was at 4.28. So
Right.
Phil, to be very clear,
Yeah.
before I actually rolled up my sleeves and put a pencil with our command team to paper, we already were at 4.28%.
Right, and so the remaining like 1 point some odd, that's
0.9%
right, 0.9,
growth.
that's the actual.
That's the net new
increase.
growth to my operating budget.
And that is that's to hire 13 new officers this year, like, or
Part-
13 new officers.
Well, that's a good clarification, because actually 0.31% of that is 18 new civilians. Because as you probably also are aware, as you followed, this municipality is required to put a next generation 911 system. And so working with our city partners, we've already found a path in order to do that. That's a public safety access point where we manage the intake of all 911 calls. There were over 411,000 of them last year. The reality is we have to disperse those and make sure that we can manage a response to them with our great partners at the Hamilton Paramedics and the fire. And so that right there is part of the process. We also need then those technical supports. We need more dispatchers. We need more IT support. We need more support in HR. Our member wellness program calls for us to be able to make sure that we are there for our members who are looking at non-occupational injuries, injuries on duty. So we have a very robust model to do that, and we need civilians in order to manage that.
Gotcha. So that 0.9%, like a percentage of that percentage is civilians, and the other percent, that's the 13 new officers?
Plus the operating growth to my budget, where I'm required to do,
Right.
respond to more calls for service,
Right.
complexities, calls,
Right.
things like that.
So it seems, so just so I'm clear, because I didn't write the budget, so that increase, it seems like a lot of it's kind of spoken for.
It is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's already, it's kind of, you don't control the union, right? The union, you guys work with them to talk about pensions and salaries.
Yeah,
and all
that actual collective agreement is agreed to the Police Services Board
Right.
and the association. But let's also not miss a few things that
Yeah.
we've been doing, which is, I think, is really important to tell our story.
Sure.
We have seen through the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan that the reality is the tenets of that plan speak to crime prevention through social development. The reality is what we're locked in, and unfortunately policing is locked into, is that we are the default service provider. So whether it's homelessness, harm reduction, poverty, mental illness, we're the ones that everyone seems to know what 911 is, and so we're the default. So what we did, and we started this in 2021 into 2022, and we're actually seeing evidence-based that it's functioning well, and it's demonstrating that we can divert people who are in crisis. Our commitment to crisis response has been incredible. I get $8.6 million from our government, the provincial government, to deal with crisis response. We took $1.6 million of that, Phil, and we transferred to an amazing partnerships with Interval House, with the YMCA. We have gone John Howard Society, CMHC, the Hamilton Regional Indian Center, where people who have skill sets and abilities to assist in transitional housing, in counseling, in youth care, been able to work with us. What we've been able to demonstrate for our Social Navigator program, our rapid intervention support team I spoke about, we have been able to actually look at being able to divert what is custodial care of people's needs 24 hours a day, and gotten down to now an apprehension rate of only 15%. That demonstrates, in fact, that we are not the right provider for many of these activities.
Right.
We've said that all along, and we have demonstrated it by having our partners at our table. 8:45 every morning, they sit around a table. If Frank Bergen needs assistance in stability of housing, or if Frank Bergen needs counseling, then he has that ability to get the right service provider and not have to rely on a default service provider, a police officer.
Right. So then do you somewhat agree with some of the critics saying that, like you just said, like police, there's other services out there that should be getting the money to help those in those needs, so you're not the default, you don't have to do that anymore, Because there's so much on the police plate. Do you, I guess you could kind of agree?
Phil, what I agree with is the philosophy is that if we don't, as a community, recognize that, in fact, risk intervention and prevention models are what we need to agree to, then, in fact, we will continually be the default provider. Our assist ambulance calls are growing just shy of 10,000 last year alone. And so the reality is, as these calls are complex, it's actually usually more than one diagnosis that we're trying to manage at that time. Are you aware, and I'm sure you've been tracking, a 45% spike in opioid deaths within our community? The reality is that our officers are administering naloxone, just shy of 600 since the inception of Narcan on the streets. So we are part of that equation, but we shouldn't be the ones left with always the resolution. Right. We have so many other amazing partners in our city that we work with, that we enjoy those partnerships, because what we're getting is better customer service, better customer care.
So just to go back to the increase, so at 0.9% increase, is it fair to say that Hamilton Police is almost underfunded compared to others?
I think what we're doing is we're funding where we need to be. Yeah. It would be very glib of me as the chief of police to say, give me more money. Right. But that would be ignorant of not being aware of what our detractors are and what people say about policing. The conversation that speaks about we bring violence to an encampment, in fact, that's just not a justified statement. The reality is, when we look at those interactions, in 2022 we had 2 homicides in encampments. We've had stabbings, we've had shootings. There are other challenges. But if you do not have the partners involved in order to actually assist people to find an off-ramp to some of their challenges they're dealing, they're very real issues, we're not going to change the narrative. Right. We are part of that conversation. Right. We want to assist our community to get better.
For sure. So yeah, then you agree that those other avenues should also get more money, like from the city, to, because it's like you said, police are part of the equation, so are they, I know you don't speak on their behalf, but they should probably get money as well, not out of your budget, but just more money in general.
That's why I've already demonstrated that $1.6 million out of my community safety grant is I would rather give those to my partners, and I'm demonstrating that leadership to do that. That being said, though, don't lose the fact, because you asked me the question, do I want more money? The reality is I am happy to have that 18.5% of our city levy, because we have to acknowledge that as a city grows, we're going to have to make sure that we can grow as a organization, as a service, in order to meet those complex needs our community is asking us to deliver.
For sure. And so I don't know if you saw what happened yesterday at City Hall. I think people are upset, and we have kind of a new council. I think it's 10 new faces. Yeah. Some have spoken out, whether it's Councilor Kretsch or Nam, saying that they can't support the budget. Is there a fear in a way that this could be the first budget in a while or ever that's been turned down or asked to be revised?
Yeah. Phil, I don't know if fear is the right word for it. The reality is, as I said, our command team, our folks of our police service have sat together and had many conversations with our police services board as well, to look at what is adequate and effective policing. That's what I'm charged with. The Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan is how we manage within a municipality, but the Police Services Act say that the chief of police have to provide crime prevention, law enforcement, assisting victims, public order, and emergent response. In order to provide adequate and effective policing, I will be comfortable getting 18.5% of the city levy. We acknowledge that as that city level grows, as we're approaching 600,000 population with projected growth of 26 to 27% over the next 10 years, our city has to plan for the future. Yeah. And in order to do that, I'm come to the GIC and to my board with a prudent, realistic ask.
And there are 177 officers right now. How many officers are there?
In total, I have 855 sworn officers, and in total we have 1,230 members of our organization.
Right. And to increase by just 13 a year for a city that I think it's at 600,000 or probably more. Yeah. That I don't know what the percentage is. Like you said, cop per pop.
Yeah.
that-
Again, we're below the median, and so when we look at our comparators, the other thing that we talked to at GIC, and it became a good opportunity just for understand is where is Hamilton,
Right.
and we look at our comparators. We have municipalities that surround us that are at 22%, 25%. Waterloo and York Region are at 32% of the levy of cost of policing. I believe, as I've said, that we've been able to manage what will be both challenges, but more importantly, the great opportunities in partnership, as articulated within the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, to actually demonstrate that we can make our city safer.
True. And when you say you're below the comparators, you mean like in terms of the proportion of their respective municipalities' budgets?
Yeah.
Right. So York is around
Their portion of the levy. Yeah, that's right. I think those comparators are important because, again, we're not immune to the same challenges that a lot of our community members are experiencing all through the Greater Toronto-Hamilton area.
Right. And I think I've read it somewhere, whether it's CBC or Global, your response to, I think, what Toronto's doing. I think they're having a social worker or someone roll with police to certain calls, and they said that doesn't come cheap, and that's what a lot of detractors seem to want. They're like, they don't want police coming to crisis calls. They want a social worker to be doing it instead. That's not free.
No, it's not free, but let's just be clear. You brought up Toronto. Toronto increased their budget. As you know, it's a $1.14 billion budget. They've actually given an operational increase of $48 million, but they've added on top of that 100 new police officers they're going to be hiring. So the reality is they are absolutely investing in policing. What we have been doing for years is we have our Coast program where we're working with our paramedics already riding with our police officers. We've expanded our social network and our community through the WRIST program, and therefore we already are demonstrating that we can take that and divert calls from either the hospital or from a cell, and that number is 15% that actually end up in apprehension.
Right.
So that's already showing a evidence-based, remarkable story that we can do it well in Hamilton.
Yeah, you're talking about evidence-based policing. Did you want to speak more on that? I know you just mentioned one tidbit. Is there anything else about it?
I think the public demands to see it, and that's what we have been doing. So we're looking at and heavily invested in what is our business intelligence and being able to demonstrate what our calls for service and being able to manage that. We right now are going to be introducing outward-facing dashboards to have real-time opportunity to share with the community what are those demands that we have on it. But evidence-based does speak of how can you take a police response and how can you change the narrative? How can you show that your partnerships and their social service connections and their skill sets can actually have a better outcome for the needs of the community member?
All right. Is there something you want to add?
No, Phil, I really appreciate the opportunity just to have some clarification.
Yeah.
We acknowledge that the actual presence of policing in some people may trigger some historical issues or some challenges, but we're open and we're being accountable for what we're doing, and we hold our members accountable because we also want to celebrate that our members do a remarkable work. They both live and work in this community, and they are part of this community.